The war for the resources. Being driven to the absolute point, Russia is seizing gas wells in Ukraine, while burning gas and plumbing wells on its own territory. It is taking away mines, quarries, factories from Ukraine. And getting nothing out of it but losses. Enterprises go bankrupt. Russia, as a state, proves itself to be an inefficient manager, bringing to decay everything that the hand of a corrupt Russian official reaches for. How does the Kremlin dispose of the natural wells seized on the territory of Ukraine, and why ordinary Russians will not become richer from this, but on the contrary, impoverished? Watch the special report Russia's ownership, how the Kremlin steals Ukrainian national resources and ruins its own. Russia has grabbed a big piece of the cake for itself. A fourth of Ukraine's mineral deposits are now under the control of the Kremlin and its henchmen because of the unleashed occupation war. Reputable experts interviewed by the Western publication The Washington Post estimate the value of these mineral resources at a truly gigantic, simply astronomical sum: almost $12.5 trillion. This is several times more than, for example, the entire GDP of Russia is going to be this year. Denazification, demilitarization, all of these were only propaganda tales, because one of the main goals of Russia's invasion of Ukraine was the Kremlin's imperial ambitions and desire to seize as many resources as possible.
The aim of the war is to fight for resources, in addition to the fact that Russia wanted to gain control over huge territories that are in the geographical center of Europe. Ukraine is one of the richest countries in the world in resources and resources of all kinds. Ukraine has 24 different trace elements that Russia is critically in need of.
Russia has seized deposits of iron ore, titanium ores, zirconium ores, strontium, lithium, uranium, coal, natural gas, and oil in Ukraine. It has established representatives of its own pocket administrations at the extractive and processing enterprises and is trying to take out of Ukraine everything it can get its hands on. Zaporizhzhia iron ore plant. It was seized by Russian troops last year, and now the occupiers are stealing and exporting ore to Russia. This is a huge enterprise. Before the full-scale invasion, millions of tons of iron ore, raw material for the production of cast iron, were mined here. Ukraine used this ore for its own needs, as well as exported it to the EU countries, earning hundreds of millions of euros of income. Now the occupiers and the administration are bragging about the loot, saying that the ore here is much better than in Russia.
This is one of the most unique enterprises, I believe, in the whole world. We mine ore with an iron content of up to 60%. Speaking about the enterprises that are located in the Kursk Bulge, they mine ore with an iron content of 38% here.
And the main thing is that everything is already ready for extraction here. The same is true for many other fields seized by the Russians. Ukraine has already carried out geological exploration there and invested a lot of money in these territories.
Ukraine, with its already developed resources, is a very tidbit, because Russia is good, of course, with its huge territories, but its resources have not been developed. And here everything is just ready-made. That is why it was possible to get much more profit from this ready-made stuff without sharing it with anyone. And exactly this was the main reason, the main economic reason for the invasion.
But it's too early for Russia to rejoice.
Anything that can be obtained on Ukrainian territory will be obtained at such a huge cost that it will never pay off in any way. There is no economic sense in this war, just no sense at all. It is pure imperialism. There is nothing else here. There is no economic benefit to Russia from annexing Ukraine's territory under any circumstances.
Everything the Putin regime touches turns, no, not into gold, rather into rusty metal. Most of the enterprises that used to bring great profit to Ukraine are either idle or operating at a loss after the occupation and seizure by the Russians. Even those enterprises that have been in the hands of the Kremlin for a long time are in a catastrophic state. Let's have a look at the Crimean Peninsula temporarily occupied by Russia. The Russian authorities promised to make it a signboard for a successful and prosperous Russia. But the Sevastopol marine plant is idle. There are practically no orders. What is recognized by the administration, put in place by the occupants. They say it will not be possible to keep the labor collective. The occupation regime is going to give part of the plant's premises for construction. There is another enterprise that used to generate a lot of income under the legitimate Ukrainian government in Crimea, on the verge of bankruptcy. It is the Sevastopol Marine Trade Port. After the annexation of the peninsula, cargo turnover there decreased 15 times. The enterprise, instead of bringing in money, is only accumulating debts. And they have to be covered from the Russian budget. That is, from the pockets of all Russians. Meanwhile, the management of the port has been caught in financial fraud. The investigative committee of Russia has opened a criminal case, due to which the officials are accused of tax evasion in the amount of 23 million rubles. And the list of such enterprises in Crimea can go on for a long time.
From a promising region, it is worth remembering what prospects were associated with Chornomornaftogaz. It has turned into an exceptionally subsidized one.
Russia did not profit from the oil and gas fields seized in Crimea and southern Ukraine either, although the plans were Napoleonic, as well as plans for the occupied territories in Donetsk and Luhansk regions. Coal. The Russians control over 80% of all coal deposits in Ukraine. The reserves here are estimated as 30 billion tons. This is what the Kremlin was interested in.
This worried the appetites of a number of Russian oligarchs and Russian politicians, who could not accept that de facto the entire Donetsk cluster ended up on Ukrainian territory.
They have taken it but haven't been able to master it. Many mines have been under the control of the Kremlin henchmen since 2014, but the Russians are not mining coal at most of them. It turned out that it is not profitable for them because the mines are too deep. What for? After all, there is their own Kuzbas, where coal is practically on the surface. So mines in the east of Ukraine remain abandoned. Salt water is not pumped out there, so it rises to the surface, and as a result, instead of a source of income, local residents have got an ecological disaster.
Large areas, households and sanitary facilities are flooded there. So high has the water table risen.
Water in wells becomes unfit for drinking. People have to leave their homes. This is the real essence of the Russian occupation.
Reminds me of the neither me nor anyone else strategy. In fact, maybe that's their backup plan. The main plan is to seize territories and use them for profit, and the backup plan is not to let anyone get them. The entire history of Russia's presence in the occupied territories, we're not just talking about Ukraine, we know about the territories of Georgia, shows that all cities, town territories ceased to exist normally. The standard of living was falling, security was falling, and there were no investments coming to these regions.
And without investment, the Russians will get nothing from the seized deposits. The most vivid example is lithium. The Kremlin also wanted to get its hands on this metal in Ukraine. After all, it is called the oil of the 21st century. It is impossible to further develop the energy sector without lithium. This metal is also needed for the production of batteries, accumulators, and most importantly energy storage systems. And the Russians have managed to seize 2 lithium deposits in Ukraine at once. These are the village of Shevchenko in the Donetsk region and Kruta Bauka near Berdyansk. This is what they look like now. Now it is more of a fisherman's paradise than a Klondike for rare and important lithium.
These deposits are very far from even a feasibility study. There is still a huge amount of work to be done by geologists. A lot of work is needed. It's not something you can just come and do. These deposits is bare land now, so you need to invest money in proper geological exploration and then set up the entire process of refining this ore. Therefore, the whole cycle has to be done.
Even before the full-scale invasion, Western investors with the necessary experience and technology were going to enter Ukraine in order to do all of this. Geologists assure us that the Russians have no chance of mining lithium in these territories. The Kremlin's plans to seize maximum territories in Ukraine and get even more natural resources in order to sell even more commodities abroad have clearly failed. The fact that this is exactly what will happen has never been a secret for economists.
It's ridiculous to discuss how much Russia is going to become wealthier from this. Russia has nowhere to put its own wealth. Its wealth is used inefficiently. There were huge projects to increase gas production there. On the Arctic Ocean shelf, there were insane projects. All of this will be stopped because now it's all inefficient. Even on the territory of Russia itself, there are a lot of fields that are not profitable to extract from. The situation is absolutely the same with oil. So all this talk that we'll annex it and get richer there, it's all just empty words.
Why should Russia, for example, seize Ukrainian gas wells if they cannot sell their own gas? So they simply have to burn some of it.
It's a waste of time to look for some economic logic here. There is no economic logic in the SMO.
The war against Ukraine and Putin's imperial ambitions are dragging the Russian economy down. And now something that seemed impossible just a few years ago has happened. Gazprom, Russia's largest transnational company, producer and exporter of gas, and the largest taxpayer, which before the war transferred trillions of rubles to the state budget, according to the results of the first half of 2023, has become loss-making, and its business will only get worse. After all, it has almost completely lost its main sales market, the European Union, after Putin himself ordered to stop supplying gas to the EU.
And we will not supply anything at all, neither gas, nor oil, nor coal. We will not supply anything.
Last year, the Kremlin hoped to intimidate and break the EU, saying that you would freeze without our gas in winter and come crawling back on your knees. But the EU countries managed to jump off the Russian gas needle, so Russia was left with nothing. And now it wants to sell its gas to China. It sells it to the Celestial Empire at a huge discount of almost 50%. This doesn't even cover the cost of production. In other words, Gazprom is operating at a loss to itself.
It turns out that Russia is subsidizing Chinese gas consumers.
And they have no other choice. After all, there is nowhere else to put this gas but China. And so the Kremlin has already decided to build the new gas pipelines to China. The Power of Siberia 2, a grandiose project that will cost at least $100 billion. And all at Russia's expense because China is not going to allocate anything for it.
Well, of course, first of all, it's not a justifiable commercial project. The very idea is so stupid, it will never be justified. There will be no benefit to the Russian budget and the Russian economy in general.
But it will benefit the officials and oligarchs close to Putin.
They are bribed contractors without any tenders who are engaged in this business on exorbitant estimates. In other words, they are laundering big money into the pockets of private entrepreneurs and corrupt officials who are profiting from the construction of inefficient and commercially unjustified gas pipelines by launching unnecessary projects.
At first, these firms were owned by oligarchs Rotenberg and Timchenko. Now they are controlled by Gazprom officials who are getting rich very quickly. Just look how much of the house of Alexei Miller, CEO of Gazprom, costs. By the way, the exact sum is not a secret. $240 million. Perhaps because of this mention Gazprom has become unprofitable. Or maybe Miller is an agent of the West who is slowly destroying Russia from inside. Russian economists have already asked sarcastically. But Gazprom still has its former gloss. Luxurious offices, a modern skyscraper, building with a unique architectural design in St. Petersburg, while everything is heading towards Gazprom going bankrupt.
We will have to subsidize Gazprom as a loss-making company. This is just the successful economic policy of the country's leadership, because of which there is a threat of Gazprom turning into a loss-making company, which does not feed the budget itself but feeds from the budget so that it can supply gas to Russian cities, so that there will be no disconnection of heating and gas for kitchens.
Those who will pay for the Gazprom's failure are Russians themselves. The government has once again decided to raise gas tariffs by 8% from July 2024 and by another 8% from 2025, despite the fact that Russia has immense reserves of gas. If even gas is becoming more expensive, what can we say about other goods? Inflation is accelerating every month. So many goods are disappearing from store shelves altogether. For example, a large supermarket in Moscow has run out of personal hygiene items. In Russia, even in the 21st century, the production of basic and elementary goods has not been established. Almost everything that is supposedly made in Russia has imported components.
In fact, there is no a single brand in which 100% of production would be Russian. Russia is a country that cannot produce a ballpoint pen in a closed cycle, according to not even me, but to Matvienko. Russia is a country that cannot produce a nail.
This phrase by the chairwoman of the Federation Council, uttered at the beginning of the full-scale invasion, when the first foreign companies announced their withdrawal from Russia because of the war it had unleashed against Ukraine, has long since become a meme.
Our nails are imported. We don't even have our own nails in the country that produces so much metal. Where are our domestic nails?
Made in China. How are we going to live further? We have to make something up. Thanks to Matvienko, condoms and nails will be produced domestically. It is even scary to imagine what is going to burn and what tear apart.
The Russian economy is unable to produce even the simplest things because it was designed for a completely different model: to sell gas, oil and other commodities abroad cheaply, receive dollars in return and import everything necessary for those dollars, starting with basic things, children's hygiene items, up to high-tech equipment.
Russia has always been an inefficient owner. The stability of the Russian economy has been based on a rigid vertical of power and strictly vertical centralized distribution of resources, on a mixture of violence, blood and suppression of everything around, and pumping up resources from the surrounding regions.
And it has already reached the point of absurdity. Russia, which started the war to make itself stronger, has become so weak that it cannot even develop its military complex. Defense plants are going bankrupt one after another. This is the only enterprise in the Russian Federation that produces Grad and Smerch multiple rocket launchers and their modifications. It is called Motoviliha plants, one of the largest artillery manufacturers in Russia. And the Russian media is reporting its bankruptcy. During the war, when the aggressor country critically needs artillery guns, the property of the enterprise is going to be sold for deaths. The reasons for the huge problems with the production of military equipment are paradoxically the same as in the case of diapers and pads.
In order to produce modern equipment, they need components that are largely under-sanctioned. They can import them, but not in the quantities they need in order to mass-produce modern weapons.
That's why Grads and Smerches are being taken out of storage from old Soviet stockpiles. This is what keeps Russia's military machine going. The aviation repair plant in the city of Engels is one on the verge of bankruptcy. This is an enterprise that deals with maintenance of Mi-8, Mi-171 and Mi-172 helicopters. The bankruptcy suit is now being considered in the courts. As well, the situation in the company is bad because of problems with technology. The same Mi-8 helicopters were developed back in the 60s of the last century.
и технологии. И
Either the technology, the equipment, and ultimately the materials that were used to produce these helicopters are kind of obsolete. The equipment is wearing out. They have simply come to the limits of their capabilities.
своих возможностей.
It is like setting up a mass production of rotary dial phones right now. It will be very difficult to do this because the world has long gone away from this. No one needs archaic equipment. So the situation is the same with the production of Mi-8 helicopters. The Russian military economy is also inherently archaic, and that is why it is starting to fail systematically. The machine-building plant, named after Dzerzhinsky in Perm, also went bankrupt. This is what the once most important facility of the Russian defense industry looks like now. This plant used to produce artillery, but now everything has stopped. The list of defense plants that are either bankrupt or on the verge of bankruptcy is enormous. These are only some of the enterprises that Russian independent journalists have got to know about. But the government is in no hurry to save them. This is the conclusion of one of the Russian internet publications, which gathered all this information together.
In war conditions, big banks and businesses and other creditors bankrupt. The last thing Russia has left as a powerful lever. Meanwhile, inefficient, at least what we can say, managers still stay in charge. Later, those who run these bankruptcies will say that everything was according to the law because, after all, it's so profitable to first issue a loan and then, as a creditor, to fit in the division of the company's property.
But the leadership of the Russian Federation keeps silent about it because it itself got stuck in corruption schemes.
Those who sell this kind of a capacity get money for it, kickbacks and so on. So money defeats evil. In this case, it defeats the evil of the Russian Federation under Putin's regime. Russian corruption, Russian recklessness and embezzlement.
So the Russian mobilized soldiers are fighting not on the typed T-14 Armata tanks, which have never been put into mass production, but on T-62 tanks from Khrushchev's era that have been taken out of storage. All of this happens because of inefficient management, but the defense sector is now a priority for the Kremlin. In other areas, the situation is even worse. There are even more bankruptcies of enterprises. Independent Russian economists claim that there is not a single state-owned enterprise in Russia that is profitable.
The Russian state is a terrible manager. It's not a big deal to prove. From time to time, there are all sorts of analytics dissections of the Russian account chambers research. As a rule, the account chambers criticizes the state corporations very much, considers them inefficient. It is impossible to find any successful examples. The state creates a state corporation for any problem. This is a real case. A problem arises, they create a state corporation, and the problem ceases to be a problem and becomes a disaster.
Everything under the Kremlin's control is in a state of decline. This regime is used to living without creating anything new, but only parasitizing on the extraction of minerals and selling them abroad.
Russia did not think in terms of creating modern enterprises, winning the global competition through technology, but it thought in an absolutely barbaric way of gaining control over minerals, over territories, over resources. They are slipping into a commodity model, trying to expand territories, taking over new countries. Again, they are targeting resources. It's a completely flawed model that will lead to the end of the Russian Empire.
Revenues from the sale of gas, oil and other commodities have fallen sharply. Hopes that we will conquer new territories, get more natural resources and get rich have failed. Greed, the desire to get more and more, as in that Russian fairy tale, led Putin to a broken dream. And all Russians will have to pay for this. The losses incurred, including those for the misappropriation of natural resources, will have to be compensated. The Ukrainian government is collecting all these facts and documenting them in order to continue to appeal to international courts.
All the damage to Ukrainian natural resources that have been actually done and the resources stolen from the people of Ukraine by Russia will be subject to special lawsuit in international institutions. And this may be lawsuits to the International Criminal Court or other global institutions, but the aggressor who stole, who occupied our natural resources, will definitely pay for it.
Заповедь «Не укради» была...
The commandment not to steal has been violated by spiritual bonds-bearing Russia, and ordinary Russians will soon realize that they will not get any benefits. Captured enterprises and natural resources bring only problems and losses to the aggressor. New territories will not make the country, which already has some of the world's largest mineral reserves, stronger. If you do not know how to capitalize on what you own, it will certainly not help you to conquer more territories. Russia is not a good owner. The country with huge gas reserves and the loss-making Gazprom. The country that started a war while allowing its defense plans to go bankrupt will soon turn into a bankrupt state itself.
Государство банкрота.
Maxim Uruapov, Special Report.